Hi everyone. I'm doing a very special recording today with two friends of mine. We've got Mamoon Yusuf, who I believe is in Spain at the moment,
Yep.
and we've got Shaul Rosenblatt, who is based in London.
Right.
Now, both of these guys are very prominent in their respective communities. I'm not going to go too much into their backgrounds, and I'll let them talk a little bit about themselves. But what this recording is about is I've met Shaul and Mamoon on my own journey in the last few years as a coach, and I found that these two individuals are very prominent in their communities, and it's really interesting for me because I found that as prominent members of their own communities, they've been really instrumental and powerful in terms of showing up and pointing people to things that are true and helpful for their communities, but also talk a language that seems to cross cultural barriers, seems to cross religions, and enable us to have a really respectful conversation despite whatever backgrounds people are coming from. So I kind of put this out separately to both of these gentlemen, and they both are really excited, and I'm glad that they've agreed to be on this. And so we've not scripted anything. We're just going to go really free flowing, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Me too.
So Mamoon, I don't know if you want to go first, just because you're on that side of my screen as I'm sitting.
Good enough for
Um,
me. Yeah, so I'm Mamoon. I do a lot of work in the Muslim community, really aiming to share the inside out paradigm of the three principles in the community. I've kind of came across the principles a few years ago through Jamie Smart and Chip Chipman and Keith Blevins, and since I came across it, I was already working in the Muslim community, and I have a blog called Quran for Busy People. And the moment I bumped into this, I've always been into personal development. I'm a fan of the Quran more than a scholar of it, you know. So I'm really honored and humbled to be in the presence of a rabbi who's, you know, grounded in the tradition. I have a lot of respect for that. I'm actually reminded of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "The one who takes the path of knowledge, God eases their path to paradise." So in our tradition, we're taught to really respect and be humbled in front of people of knowledge. So I'm really just humbled to be here and honored and privileged to have this conversation. The work that I do basically is taking the principles into the Muslim community, in whatever form that takes. So there's been a blog, I do a lot of coaching and have mastermind groups and that kind of thing. And recently I have a TV show on British Muslim TV where they're just filming me coaching people and seeing really big changes happening in their lives. And really it looks to me like all I'm doing is putting God or mind back in the equation of our well-being, which seems really obvious because I'm talking to a room full of believing Muslims, right? Usually. But it just seems to really do something for people when we see not just God in an object thing out there, but something that's really present with us all the time. So that's basically what I do.
and just to be clear, for anyone that doesn't understand what the three principles are or the inside out paradigm, what you're talking about is, and what Shaul and I and you all have in common is some principles that have now been emerging in psychology, and are the way that a lot of psychologists are now moving towards in terms of describing how our psychological experience is made up of the world.
Yes.
So thanks, Mamoon. So Shaul, what about yourself? As Mamoon mentioned, you're a rabbi. Could you just tell us a little bit about your background and what your involvement is with psychology as well as religion?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been involved in Jewish education for how long is it now? 30 years or so, and it's quite a while. And I always had frustrations as a Jewish educator, in as much as I felt there was a lot of focus on the form of the religion, but there wasn't enough on the content, the spiritual essence behind it all. And a few particular things kind of concerned me. One was that God seemed to have disappeared from religious life, funny as that might sound. Religion in Judaism, and I know kind of it's true in the broader sense of other religions, has become about what you do more so than about the experience you have and the connection you have to God and the spiritual connection. And I also felt that something that was really important to me in my as an educator, the rabbis tell us that when you educate, they say "Hemidu talmidim harbe." They say stand up many students, and they ask what does it mean stand up many students? Why not teach many students? Because you have to put people on their own 2 feet. You have to stand them up. You don't want students who depend on you, who rely on you, who look to you. You wanna kind of help people towards their own independence. That's what education is about. And I felt that I didn't really know how to do that. It's frustrating for me. I didn't know how to help people find their own independence, find confidence in what they knew themselves, be able to make their own free will decisions, and find that sense of connection to God. And to me, that's what Judaism was about. What it should be about, what it was about in ancient times or in less recent times, maybe not so far back as ancient times. And I just felt like I was I reached a point where I was almost at the end of my tether in education. I was just giving up almost, because I just felt like if I can't do those things, then why do I want to be engaged in Jewish education? And then I came across the principles. God has His ways, and the right time, the right place. I just came across these ideas, was really touched by them myself, and that's what kind of was the most powerful thing for me, was that I saw how this understanding started to affect my life and how I was and how I lived. And I felt like, well, if it can affect me, then it must be something that can help others as well. And I kind of jumped on it. The minute I came across this, I felt this is something I want to bring to the Jewish community. And I already had a Jewish educational organization, and but I just felt like changing that around wasn't going to work. So I started a new one called Tikkun, and it was interesting to me as we started to teach these ideas. I realized that they are incredibly universal. They are human ideas. They're not Jewish ideas, although they're very consistent with Judaism. But they're not Jewish per se. They are much more basic and much more fundamental than that. And as we started to teach and engage people, we found that people from all faiths were sort of coming to us, which was really interesting to me. And I really liked that. I really enjoyed that. And I also liked the idea of what was happening was not just people from other faiths kind of coming to learn and that interaction, but for the Jewish community, I felt that was something really valuable for them to interact with people of other faiths, because I do find that the Jewish community, as I'm sure with other communities, can be quite closed and insular, and they only sort of interact with other Jews. Certainly, the religious community, the Orthodox community, which is sort of the community I'm a part of, and it was great for me to see people interacting with people who are other faiths like that, and I know that there's quite a lot of what they call interfaith dialogue that goes on between communities. But my feeling, I was never a fan of that, just because I felt like, well, what are you going to talk about? You've got to have some sort of common language to talk about. Don't just talk about how much we love each other and how great we each are. There's got to be some goal, some focus, some direction. I found that this actually, in a beautifully natural way, just created that interfaith dialogue, just like I say, naturally, without in a non-contrived way, and that was really something that I've sort of enjoyed seeing as well, and felt that I wanted to encourage more of and do more with. And I'll just add one final thing, and I've talked for a long time here. I just recently it was one of our festivals, and we had some time off, and I thought, what am I going to do with my kids? And I said, you know what? Why don't I take them to a mosque? We've never been to a mosque before. Let's go and engage the Muslim community, and just my kids were like, well, how can you go there? And we're going to get blown up, And I mean, that's kind of some of the attitudes in the community, unfortunately. And we went there, and we had a really wonderful time there. And there's a program that we run, Tikkun, the organization runs. It's called Light Up a Life at Christmas time. We the Jewish community sort of volunteers in charities, in sort of non-Jewish charities that often struggle to find volunteers at Christmas time. And because it's not our holiday per se, so there's no reason why we wouldn't volunteer at that time of year. So we've been running this program for a few years now, and it just occurred to me that it's something that we could engage the Muslim community in as well. And so through my contact with this mosque, we are hopefully we've got to see if it happens this year, but we're hopefully going to set up a bit of a homeless soup kitchen maybe in this mosque that is staffed by Muslims and Jews together. So I just feel like there's a very natural sense of dialogue that can be created through this understanding, and that's amongst other things, that's something that's very meaningful for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Shaul. I mean,
Sure.
it's so lovely to hear that from you. And what really occurred to me is that, and this is just my view, but I can't often hear about people who say religion's really a problem and religion is the cause of all conflict. I've even heard people say people are too religious, that's the problem, and when people get too fundamental about things. But what I really loved about what you said was the problem isn't the religion. The problem is people looking at the kind of the form of the religion, what do you do, as opposed to what the religion is pointing to. And it's so interesting that we've got two people who, you really, I can sense where you're coming from, where your heart is. And you are people who are extremely passionate about your religion and your faith.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Something that occurred to me as you were talking was if we were just to replace the words Jewish and Judaism with Muslim and Islam, everything you said would have been completely accurate.
Yeah.
Completely accurate. It's quite.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do get that sense. I get the sense that we're all in the same place a little bit nowadays. Or you could probably replace it with Christian and Christianity as well.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, I would guess that you could. So yeah, and I think because of that gives us a lot of sort of commonality. I think there's a lot of I think we're all struggling. I think all religions kind of having a little bit of a hard time right now engaging people in something deeper and something more meaningful. I think on the one hand you have what you might call the fundamentalists, who will stick to it and be there no matter what, but they comes with its own problems. And then you have the other side of people who are just kind of losing interest, and there isn't so much of a middle ground there. And I think that what you need in that middle ground is something more spiritual, more meaningful, more relevant for people, not just going through the motions of the religion without any sense of connection, without any sense of feeling. I think you'll have people that are willing to do that, and those will be your kind of absolute diehards, so to speak. But I think the masses aren't so willing to do that, and I think that having lost that sense of connection in certain ways, I think that's why. And again, I can only speak for Judaism, but that's why Judaism is struggling a little nowadays. And I think this is a solution. I think if we can reconnect people to their own sense of connection, to their own religion, to what works for them, to what they feel connected to, but give them the feeling of it, give them the meaning behind it, give them the connection, give them the spiritual heritage that exists for them. I think that's something that's going to make a big difference in any faith.
So, Mamoon, I really wanted to ask you that, kind of building on what Shaul said, is that every religion, every faith is facing its own challenges. I think over the last 10, 15 years, Islam has faced a number of challenges. You could say a lot of PR challenges is maybe one way to describe it. And there are many different approaches that people have taken. Some people get very defensive. Some people have what you would term turned fundamentalist. What would your thoughts be on that in terms of how Islam can address that and build back bridges with other communities?
Yeah. So something that occurs to me is, it looks to me and I can say this from the Muslim tradition, but it looks to me like it's true of probably all traditions, spiritual traditions, is that there's real healing available in the spiritual traditions, and it's kind of an easy thing to miss, you know. It looks to me as it's really obvious to me that Islam doesn't cause terrorism, but contains the cure for it. And as all spiritual traditions do, because we're talking about people who are really sick, and they need medicine, and all they have is poison in their own minds. And yeah, it reminds me of something that I think Sydney Banks wrote in The Missing Link, where he said, I have great respect for the priests and the therapists of the world, because they're the healers of this world. And he said rituals are he didn't use the word rituals, but this is what I took from it. Rituals are to the church what techniques are to the therapists. They're looking towards the form, and they're taking you away from the actual truth you seek. And that really got me as a professional coach who was trying to heal people, and as a seeker of spiritual wisdom, knowing that there's healing there too. That really got me, because it was just like, yeah, that's an easy mistake to make. As we look more towards behavior and the form, the ritualistic form, it's fine, but not if we're looking there and simultaneously looking away from the essence of who we really are. And yeah, it looks to me like somebody who reaches such a level of kind of anger and hatred, and they have a fundamental misunderstanding of where experience is coming from. And it doesn't matter what religion or background you are, if you have that fundamental misunderstanding, you might not, it depends on your context, you might not go and try and kill people, but you're going to be hurting yourself at least. And there's healing in every tradition. So I think, Professor Keith Blevins, he read me a poem that I believe was written by a Jewish gentleman, and it just started with this simple self-correction. I can't believe I've missed it all this time. Really simple self-correction that changes everything on the outside, but it's internal. And that's what we're talking about here, and I think that's why I'm really looking up to Tikkun at the moment as really a model of how this can, because it's famous. Certainly, people within the principles community know about it, and you're doing amazing work. And I feel out of place talking so much when there's someone of real religious knowledge and grounding with us, So I'm gonna.
Well, the rabbis do tell us, Ezu Chacham, who is the wise man? Halomi Mikol Adam, he who learns from every man. So I'm very happy to hear what everybody has to say. Make myself into a wise man that way. So it's you usually benefit more from listening than from talking. So I'm happy to talk, but I'm equally happy to listen. So it's and I'm enjoying what you're saying. So please don't feel inhibited at all. But I just want to kind of continue from what you said there and respond to something that you were saying, Ankush. People, you're right. Throughout my years, I've heard people saying that the religion causes wars and causes problems and causes all sorts of trouble in the world. And I think that's a very anachronistic way of seeing the world. It just doesn't work. If you look at the facts and you look at the history, maybe 500 years ago you could have said that, but you can't say that today. If you look at the 20th century, which war in the 20th century was a religious war? I mean, I can't even think of one. I mean, I'm sure there must have been, but there's almost nothing. You know, if you look at the from the Russian Revolution to the First World War to the Second World War to the Korean War to the Vietnam War to the Israeli-Arab conflicts, you know, there's there's no wars. The Falklands War. Show me a war that religion caused in the 20th century. It just doesn't exist. And the truth is that it's people, it's human beings, unfortunately, that cause wars. And it's, as you say, Mamoon, it's misunderstanding. That's all it is. It's people believing that somehow other people are to their detriment in the world. Other people are going to harm them. Other people are in their way. And when people are able to see the world differently, when people are able to find their own peace of mind and their own sense of well-being, you realize that who you are and what you are has nothing to do with anybody around you, and nobody can do anything to you. Nobody can get in your way. Nobody can harm you, because it's you know, it's an inside-out world. The world happens from the inside. It starts on the inside. It's not that the outside world affects who I am and creates who I am and shapes who I am, and can get in the way of who I am. It's that it's that I create my own self, and then the outside world sort of develops around that for me as an individual. And as soon as a person understands that, you have that appreciation then that there's really nothing that any other human being could do to bother me, to concern me, to get in my way, and so, you know, sorry, that's my phone there. Some annoying person getting in my way. um, so you know, it just doesn't leave room ultimately for wars and conflicts and anything along those lines. It's you know, there's no space for that within this understanding, and so I think that this is a foundational understanding that if people of different religions all shared it, there would be no room for conflict. You might disagree. You might have disagreements as to what religion is and who's right and who's not right, or whatever the case might be. But you wouldn't come into conflict because you wouldn't get personal about it. There's nothing personal to be had in interhuman relationships. It's just what we can learn from each other, what we can share with each other, what we can disagree with each other, have interesting, even heated conversations maybe, but that's all just interesting experiences shared with other people. It's not other people sort of affecting my world in any way, and I think that's what this understanding points people towards. That is, has the ability to be so helpful in terms of these conflicts. And you know, you look at the world today. I don't think we're in any way improved, you know, than we were 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 300 years ago. It's just the same old things going on in different places, in different contexts, in different formats, but it's still people suffering, and in essence taking out that suffering on those around them, and you get in the way of people who are suffering. You know, don't get in their way. You know, stay away from people who don't understand that the world's a really beautiful place, without them needing to do anything to make it that way.
So, I mean, let's get a bit juicy now, right? So
Okay.
we're having a very nice, pleasant conversation, and there's a lot of mutual respect and mutual admiration here, which is great, and it's great to see. But if we come out of this and we come out into your various different communities, and you mentioned different wars there, and you mentioned kind of the Israel-Arab war, are we ever going to see, or do you ever see a potential for peace, for example, in somewhere like the Middle East, where you've got such differences of opinions, and you've got whole countries and regions and areas which fundamentally want to kind of destroy each other? It's all well and good us sitting here and having this lovely conversation, but is that possible? Do you see that ever being resolved? And that's to either of you.
Well, I have a thought on it, which is that if you look, the West has done its best to try and import democracy into the Middle East, and the West sort of just somehow feels that because it's worked for them, it should work for everybody. That democracy is the way forward, And I think, having spent a lot of time in the Middle East myself, I think that one of the challenges over there is you have a very different mentality. And I don't know that democracy is the system that works over there. However, what I do think is that the three principles understanding is absolutely universal. It's absolutely, democracy is something that's it's more form. It's more human way of dealing with government, a system created by human beings that creates quite benevolent governments in the West, if you can get it to work, and that's a big if. But because it's form doesn't mean that it's universal. It's kind of worked where it's worked, and kind of, as you can see, it hasn't worked very well wherever they've tried it anywhere else. So, but because the nature of these principles is so universal, it's a truth. It's a truth about human beings, and it's an absolute truth. It's true about every single human being. You, 8 billion human beings in this world. You put anyone in front of me, that's who they are. That is their experience of life. These three principles are what's creating their experience of the world. There's nobody that isn't happening to. So I think because it's a truth for everybody, it's a truth for the guy who's for the Israeli in Israel, for the Palestinian in Palestine, for the Islamic State terrorist in Iraq and Syria. It's true for him just as much as it's true for me and for us sitting here today. And it's just a matter of if you can get a listening ear somehow, some way. And I think we've got to keep trying. You can't give up on these things. You can't just sit and watch the incredible suffering that humanity is going through in these different places, and just give up and say, well, this is a 2,000-year-old conflict. There's no chance of solving it now. I don't know if that's true, because I don't know that this type of approach has ever been tried. Has ever been sort of focused on. This direction has ever been looked at towards solving these things. So I would ultimately feel hopeful that there is the scope and the potential for solutions. I think it's a long way ahead of us to try and get people to listen and to be interested and to be open-minded. But I do think that because this understanding is something so common to human beings, that you strip away the more superficial and you strip away the form and you touch something deeper, then any two human beings can have a relationship. Any two human beings can find the goodness in each other when with this understanding to guide them in that direction. So I would ultimately feel hopeful, but not tomorrow or next week or next year necessarily either. I think there is a way to go with these things.
Yeah, it's a really great question, Ankush. And there was a time in my own life where I didn't know if it was possible for me to have peace myself inside my own mind. There was so much inner conflict, and there was so much judgment in my own head. And the idea of just inner peace was too foreign. Like I love the idea of it, but it was just like, yeah, but it's not going to last, right? Now it's just a reality. And really, one thought changed it, one realization changed it. And rather than thinking about creating peace in all of the world, it just seems so much more. It seems more valuable to look at creating peace in all of your world, in all of yourself. From that place, two people, regardless of their backgrounds and circumstances and all of that, can really connect in a way that real change can happen. And it's so easy to miss, especially in a heated conflict, right? Even I can miss it by watching the news. I can watch the news and miss it, right? Surefire way to go outside is watch the news for more than about 5 minutes, right? And it's just like, I'm like, oh God, but that's not what Islam is. Come on, what are you talking? Then pretty soon I'm outside in. I'm seeing things backwards, and it's looking to me like I'm angry because of the injustice I'm seeing on my television, which is actually not true. Injustice can't cause anger. Anger can cause injustice. You know, um, we act as though the inner conflicts we have no, our own egos have no external repercussions. But I'm pretty sure all external conflicts start with internal conflicts. I've seen that in my life anyway. When my relationships fall apart, actually I fell apart way before I started tearing them up. There's something really fundamental about this that can cause real change, and I've seen it on a small scale in my life. You know, and that really gives me hope. Because if inner peace really is our natural state, which is something the Prophet said, peace and blessings be upon him, and it's something that the principles really point towards, then war and conflict isn't really natural. Like, we look through history and all we see is war and conflict because that's all that was worth writing about. We're not looking at the thousands of years in between where Muslims and Christians and Jews and people of different backgrounds were living really peacefully together. Just kind of, our egos don't want to look at that because peace is boring, right? Right? We want the exciting conflict, even in this conversation, right? I'm just like, all right, let's go juicy now, right? It's true, it's more exciting, but well, that's how it looks to me anyway, and it gives me a lot of it really reassures me to have this. The fact that we're having this conversation really is reassuring, because it's true. We're talking about something fundamental that crosses all religions. It's truth, you know.
Yeah, it's really interesting that what we're talking about, this understanding, this new psychology, this spiritual truth. It's the only thing I've ever come across in my background was the personal development world, and it's the only thing I've come across where someone said to me, "Oh, this is really taking me back into my Christian faith," and then subsequently my mother saying it's taken her to a deeper understanding of her Hindu faith, and you're talking to her about Islam, and Shaul's talking about it from a Judaism kind of point of view, and it really points to something that's true for all human beings. And for me, I'm really curious what you guys think, because for me, I get a lot of hope about that. Because you're right, Mummy, and I loved what you said, that we like to focus on the conflicts, but what we don't do is focus on what's changed. And I'm very hopeful because, and I just give a couple of examples that um, not too many years before I started at school, it was very common for kids in the UK to get caned, to get hit in schools. And that's totally gone, like in just a generation, it's completely stopped, and we wouldn't dare kind of do that to children now, and how I see it as evolved as a species. Similarly, kind of just with parents in the UK hitting their children, that's the whole view around that is changed. And I think that you're right. We do look at conflict and areas where there are problems, as opposed to overall. I think there's some really really positive changes that have happened in the world. So I'm quite full of hope, and for me, I believe that this understanding and these principles really can bring a completely different way of change than what I originally saw. And again, and I don't think change will come about through, world leaders suddenly, they might do, but world leaders having an insight, or someone famous or something like that. But it really will be ordinary people like Shaul, like Mamoon, who have seen something true, and then from that place go and start sharing that. And it's kind of like, they say, I don't know, is it a Buddhist saying or something, like, 1,000 lamps can be lit from one lamp or something like that. So I just wondered kind of what your take is on hope, and about this understanding really changing the world going forward.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 1,000% that the more we find in common, the the more we're gonna kind of, relate to each other and respect each other and have good sort of good dealings with each other. And I think that when you find that actually the deepest thing of all is something that you have in common with another human being, that's the most powerful thing of all. It's not just we've got, I don't know, we both like skiing or we both like Chinese foods, it's that we share the same spiritual essence. Um, we're children of the same God. We're brothers and sisters in that way, and that's a truth. When people see that as a truth, it's not some kind of convenient construct to make people relate to each other better, or well, look at this person as your brother, and then you'll feel better about him. It's not some sort of cognitive technique to try and make you feel better, but it's a truth about other human beings. It's a reality. We are all souls, and we are all sparks of the same greater and deeper reality that we call God, and we share the same God, and we share the same heritage, and we share the same tradition, and ultimately we share the same history as well. And there might have been little nuances and differences and subtleties along the way, but ultimately we share so much more than we don't. And as you said, Mamoon, if we want to focus on our differences, and those differences might be more juicy in a certain way, well, then we're going to get frustrated and upset and not have good relations with each other. But if we want to look towards that which we have in common, and the deep truth of that which we have in common, then that's what's going to ultimately solve the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, it occurred to me as you were speaking. I was at a Muslim conference recently, and there was a storyteller there, and she just said something that really struck me. She said, "You can't hate someone whose story you know," and that really struck me. It was like, that's really true. To actually hate someone, you have to make them a demon, like not really know, like that person. It's not a real person. It's like, think of them like it's you'd have to think of them as like a zombie in The Walking Dead. Like they're not real people. Our people are real people. It reminds me of this old this old Sufi story of there's this man in a mosque, a very religious looking man, and he's with this other guy, and he says, you know, we should stick together because we're Muslims and we're safe. But you gotta be careful around those people who aren't Muslims because they don't really get it. They don't know God and stuff like that. So be careful with them. And then the other guy's like, yeah, you're right. We should just stick together. And then he says, well, actually, those Muslims in those other countries, they as well, they have some weird practices and they're they get some things really wrong. We should probably just stick with the Muslims in our own country. The other guy's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. They have weird practices out there. Yeah, and he's like, well, actually, in our own country, we've got some Shia Muslims and Sufi Muslims and something. We should really just stick to the people in this mosque. It's like, oh God, yeah, that's right. I mean, the mosque in the other side of town, they do weird stuff. And he's like, yeah, so people in this mosque. And then he's going, actually, people in this mosque, there's knowledgeable people in this mosque. We should stick with them. A lot of people in this mosque, they just come by. They don't really know about religion. And then he's like, yeah, it's true. We should stick to the people of knowledge. And he's like, yeah, so it's me and like three other guys. Well, those other guys who have knowledge, they're from, I don't know, because they're from different schools of thought. And he said, don't listen to this. He said, don't do this and don't do that. And he's like, oh yeah, it's true. It's like, really, you and me should just stick together. And the guy's like, yeah, really, you and me should just stick together. Cause, then he goes, actually, I'm not really sure about you. And so pretty, and when you start thinking in a divisive way, it's not about like Because I don't know the inner workings of the Jewish community, but I would imagine if it's anything like the Muslim community, right? It's like it's not just a cross-faith thing; it's a cross intra-community conflict, and then there's within each little group there's conflict. In the end, it's just like, all right, there's madness here, and the really obvious truth is missing. You know, Mahatma Gandhi said, I have a lot of respect for Muslims because I worship the same God as the Muslims. And he was a Hindu, right? And people were like, what? And he said, well, I worship the truth. And I know that Muslims worship the truth. That's the God we all worship. And which is in Islam, al-haq, which means truth, is that's what we worship. And I'm babbling, but right before this meeting, it struck me that I was praying, and then I was just thinking about this meeting coming up, and I was thinking, Shaul has probably been praying today too. I would guess. I mean, he's a rabbi.
I hope so.
Yeah. I was like, well, you know, we pray 5 times a day. I believe in the Jewish faith. There's like 3 prayers or something a day.
That's right.
And I was like, and we're really praying to the same God. And as that occurred to me, I couldn't help but pray for Shaul. And I was like, plus Shaul's a man of knowledge. Like he's a rabbi. I mean, if you want to interview 2 people, it should be like a sheikh and a rabbi, not just this random guy and a rabbi. You know? But I couldn't help but pray for Shaul because he's not only is he on the same path that I'm on, but he's clearly done so much good work in his community that I aspire to in the Muslim community. And I really the feeling I have towards you both, like that can't be faked through an interfaith dialogue. You know, it's something real. And when that's there, the forms are going to take care of themselves. So.
Well, thank you. So I was wondering why I had such a good day today. Clearly, it's your prayers. You know? I appreciate that.
So we've pretty much run out of time. I wanted to kind of keep it under 45 minutes.
Okay, take one last little story just that relates to what.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so it's a very similar story, kind of in the Jewish faith, but they tell sort of a joke about a Jewish guy gets washed up on a desert island, and they come to save him, 10 years later, and he's built up the island, and they shows them around, and there's 2 synagogues there. And they said to him, why are there 2 synagogues? There's only one of you. He said, well, this is my synagogue, and that's the synagogue that I would never pray in. So it's the same type of feeling, unfortunately, that, I mean, you see that when you start to think about how much we have in common, even in our faults, and even in our problems, and even in our challenges, there's so much, we share so much. We really share so much. So I really appreciate that, Mamoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if people wanted to get hold of you and find out more about the work you're doing, how might they be able to do that?
Email's probably the best nowadays, Should give you my email address?
Yeah.
It's Shaul, SHAUL, @tikun.co.uk.
And Mamoon, how about yourself?
So the best way would be either email or go to my website, but it's the same. It's Mamoon Yusaf, MAMOON, Yusaf, YUSAF, either .com or @gmail.com for the email.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on. If we get a good response, would you guys be willing to come back again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Such an honor.
A pleasure, real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, guys.
And I just wanted to